good? Yep, I think. Yep. Alright, well, we're good. Well, hello everyone. Welcome into another episode of Matt's Sports Talk. Now, in this video, I'm going to be doing my Crossroads League projection in terms of all 10 teams, where they stand going into the new year. And I will, of course, the first half of conference play does not end until after the games are completed on Saturday, January 17th, so I plan on recording a video at that time before we get into the second half of conference play, which starts Saturday, January 24th. So I'm going to be recording a video probably Monday, January 19th, more than likely, talking about my updated projections for everybody finishing just in the Crossroads League, only on the women's basketball side, 1 through 10. So make sure that you stay tuned for that. And I will be, and that's why I wanted to record this video today, going over my official projections based on what we've seen so far. And I think I might have done this a couple of weeks ago, but that was just based off of the Massey rating computer projection system. But I wanted to record this video and just talk about just my personal projections of where everybody stands in terms of the Crossroads League women's basketball side and projecting the teams finishing 1 through 10th. So without further ado, let's dive in. Now, I have on my iPad here everybody's statistics in terms of all 10 Crossroads teams, and I'm going to start talking about just in terms of conference games only where everybody stands. And of course, St. Francis is first in that category, scoring 81.5 points per game in conference play only, and this is what I'm going to hone in on. I'm not going to include overall records, just conference records and conference statistics. So St. Francis is first in the league in points per game at 81.5. Marion right behind them in second place at 78.3. Taylor right behind them, averaging 75.5 points per game in conference play. Taylor is in third place right now. And this is a shock for, I think, really for a lot of people, because Taylor was dead last year in the conference, and they were projected 7th this year. And they have really surprised people. Now, I know they're currently sitting in a tie for, I believe, second or third. I believe second, actually. Yes, second with Marion at 4-0 in league play. I personally don't think Taylor stays there the rest of the way. And, of course, I'm just going to be making my predictions all the way through the rest of the season, at least based on what I think so far. And then once we officially hit the conference break, January 17th, after those games are completed, then I will be doing my final prediction of where I think teams will be in the last 9 games of league play. Moving forward as league play concludes Saturday, February 21st, so make sure that you stay tuned for that. And now I will also be recording videos as we approach the end of the regular season, going over playoff scenarios in terms of tiebreakers, whether that's head-to-head, common opponent, based on the latest ARC or the latest Massey rating. So again, make sure that you stay tuned for that. And that will more than likely be coming your way as we head probably Thursday, February 19th. More than likely, once we'll pretty much know all tiebreaker scenarios at that time. So now going back to our points per game in terms of offensive points, and you have Huntington sitting in 4th place in the conference at 74.3 points per game. IWU, Indiana Wesleyan, 5th at 71.3. Spring Arbor, 6th at 70.8. Bethel, 7th at 63.5. Grace in 8th at 61. And of course, the top 8 teams get into the league tournament. And then Goshen in 9th place at 52.3 points per game. And Mount Vernon Nazarene dead last in conference play in terms of points per game, only averaging 52, and that is something that has really hurt them this year, and they are really struggling with turnovers as well. And so now, and what's interesting now, you look at those numbers in terms of offensive shooting, and then you look at the offensive shooting percentages and free throw percentages. You have St. Francis averaging 51% from the field, 43 from beyond the arc. Marion averaging 49 from the field, 40 from beyond the arc. So, I mean, obviously that tells you all you need to know, because Marion and St. Francis are by far the best top two teams in the conference. Then you have Taylor in third, 40% from the field, 25 from three. So obviously you would love to see the three-point shooting percentage come up, especially if you're head coach of the Lady Trojans, which is Cassie Wiseman. So obviously you would love to see those numbers improve. And then Huntington, 42 from the field, only 27 from three. So again, something that you really don't want to see if you're head coach Darby Maggard. And then Indiana Wesleyan, fifth at 44.4 points, or excuse me, 44% shooting from the field, 35 from three. So the Wildcats, believe it or not, in terms of shooting, are technically in roughly third. Actually, they would actually be in third place technically in league play in terms of shooting from the field, and they would be in third place in league play only in terms of shooting from three. And these are just averages, by the way, not actual numbers. But still, really not bad at all for the Wildcats. And then, of course, Spring Arbor only averaging 36 from the field, 27 from three. Now, Spring Arbor is a really, really dangerous team this year, and especially in terms of on the defensive end, they are first in defense, or actually first in the league in terms of forcing turnovers per game. They have a really good defensive efficiency rating. So this is a team that could easily finish in the top 3 or 4, and I'm going to dive into that here in just a second. And then Bethel averaging 38 and 30% respectively in terms of shooting. Grace 30 and 21. Grace, another team really struggling with turnovers every game. Goshen 33 and 30, and Mount Vernon 36 and 30 in terms of that. Now you look at free throw percentage, and free throw percentage is actually, believe it or not, Mount Vernon has the highest free throw percentage in terms of conference games, averaging 85% at the line. If you based that, if you go off of that in terms of which, who has the highest free throw percentage, 1 through 10, Mount Vernon would be first at 85.7. And then you would have Bethel in second place at 83.8. Indiana Wesleyan would be in third at 77.8. Then you would have St. Francis fourth at 75. And then you would have Taylor in fifth at 72.3. You would have Huntington sixth at 71. I believe that's what I see. Mount Vernon would be first. Bethel would be second. St. Francis third. You would have Mount Vernon Nazarene first. Then you would have Bethel second. Indiana Wesleyan third. St. Francis fourth. And then Taylor fifth. Huntington sixth. At 71.9 for Huntington, 72.3 Taylor, 75 on the nose for St. Francis, 77.8 for Indiana Wesleyan, and 83.8 for Bethel, 85.7 Mount Vernon. So those would be the order of these 6 teams with the highest free throw percentage in league games only. Would be Mount Vernon Nazarene first, followed by Bethel second, Indiana Wesleyan third, St. Francis fourth, Taylor fifth, Huntington sixth at 71.9, and then you would have Spring Arbor seventh in league play in terms of free throw percentage, 70.8, which is the exact same number as their points per game in conference play only. So that's really, really interesting. And then so you would have Spring Arbor seventh, and then you would have Goshen eighth at 70.3 at the free throw line. You would have Goshen in eighth, and then you would have Marion in ninth at just 66.7 at the line. And this is pretty weird for Marion because, see, if you're Marion, you're averaging, roughly about 80 points per game. And obviously you're the number 1 team to beat in the Crossroads League, no doubt about that. And now Marion's defensive pressure is also really good. They're forcing roughly about 20 turnovers a game. So again, really, really good numbers there. But the one downside for Marion is they're only averaging 66% opportunity strike this year, and that's just in terms of league games only. So obviously, when you go up against a team like Marion, you are really going to have to outscore them at the free throw line, and then hope that you can keep the game pretty close, roughly 5 to 6 points, and then try to win the game at the free throw line. I guess you could argue that, especially because really everybody else in the conference has higher free throw percentage numbers than Marion. The only teams that do not have a higher free throw percentage number in terms of league games only other than Marion. The only other team beneath them is Grace, and Grace is in last place only averaging 58.9 at the line. So, obviously those numbers are, are pretty crazy. And then you look at, offensive rebounding, and this is just in league play only. Taylor is first in this category, followed by Spring Arbor at 46, Taylor 46.8, and this is total rebounding on the offensive end. Bethel third at 36.5, Grace at 43, Huntington 45.8, Goshen 27, St. Francis 34, Marion 38, Mount Vernon, Nazarene 34, and Indiana Wesleyan dead last in offensive rebounding, so kind of a little bit of a surprise there. In terms of offensive ball control, St. Francis first in that category, followed by Marion, then Spring Arbor and Indiana Wesleyan tied for third, then Bethel, Goshen, Huntington, Taylor, Mount Vernon, Nazarene, Grace. Now, in terms of offensive efficiency, St. Francis is first in that category, 1.128, Marion second, 1.031, Indiana Wesleyan third, 0.993, followed by Huntington at 0.921, Bethel 0.920, Taylor 0.911, Spring Arbor 0.871, Mount Vernon Nazarene 0.725, Goshen 0.703, and Grace 0.663. So in terms of offensive efficiency, Indiana Wesleyan has a really, really good number there. Now in terms of defensive ball control, Spring Arbor's first in this category, and this is crazy. They are averaging 24.5, forcing 24.5 turnovers per game, and this is just in conference play only. 16 steals a game. Marion second in that category, forcing 22.8 turnovers, 11.3 steals. Taylor third, 21.5 turnovers, forced 13 steals. St. Francis fifth, averaging 20.8 turnovers, forced 8.8 steals. Indiana Wesleyan averaging 18 turnovers per game in conference play and averaging 9 steals a game. And this is obviously for Indiana Wesleyan unfamiliar territory, because last year they were only averaging, I believe, 12 turnovers a game, and this year they're averaging 18, and just in terms of conference play. So obviously you want to get those numbers up. Grace also forcing 18 turnovers per game, Goshen 17.5, Huntington 16.8, Bethel 15.8, and Mount Vernon Nazarene only forcing 8 turnovers per game and 4.5 steals. And now in terms of defensive efficiency, you have, in terms of conference play, Huntington first in this category at 0.807, Grace 1.014, Taylor 0.804, Spring Arbor fourth, 0.681, followed by Bethel 0.954, St. Francis 0.778, Marion 0.672, Mount Vernon Nazarene 1.139, Indiana Wesleyan second to last 0.836, and Goshen last 1.138. So really, really unfamiliar territory for the Wildcats there. And as we wrap up this video, let's talk about the updated standings going into conference play that resumes on Saturday, January 3rd. Marion and Taylor tied for the 1 seed, 4-0 in conference play, both 13-0 overall. And these two teams play each other on Saturday, so obviously the winner of this game is going to have sole possession of first place. And then you have St. Francis Spring Arbor tied for 3rd and 4th at 3-1. St. Francis 13-1, Spring Arbor 11-1. Huntington also tied for the 3 seed at 3-1, 11-3 overall. Indiana Wesleyan, the 6 seed, 7-6 overall. So they really struggled this year, especially on the road. They are a perfect 5-0 at home, so they hope to keep that going on Saturday. Bethel, the 7 seed at 1-3, 9-4 overall. Grace, the 8, 8-6 overall, 0-4 in league play. Mount Vernon Nazarene, 4-10 overall, 0-4 in league play. Goshen, 3-10 overall, 0-4 in league play as well. Looking at the teams that are still perfect at home on the year, Marion, Taylor, 5-0 and 6-0 respectively. St. Francis 5-0 at home, Spring Arbor also 5-0 at home, and Huntington 7-0 at home. Indiana Wesleyan also undefeated at home so far at 5-0. And the only teams undefeated on the road are Marion and Taylor, obviously, because both are undefeated in terms of being 13-0. So pretty, obviously, that's all you need to know there. And then looking at the upcoming games for Saturday, you'll have Mount Vernon Nazarene at Grace, number 5 Marion at receiving votes Taylor, number 20 Huntington at Bethel. You'll have Spring Arbor at receiving votes Indiana Wesleyan. I really don't understand why Spring Arbor is not ranked, because I honestly think they should easily be inside the top, or at least no higher than 20th. And then at number 7, St. Francis at Goshen. And those will be your games coming up on Saturday. And as we end this video, I do want to take just a minute and talk about my projections in terms of where the teams are right now, where I think in terms of women's Crossroads League basketball, where all the teams will finish. So I'm going to talk about that as we end this video. And then I'll be recording a video more than likely on Monday, January 19th, talking about my update or my final projections for where all 10 league teams, Crossroads League teams, will finish, especially because at that time we'll only have 9 conference games left. So I'm going to start at the bottom with teams finishing roughly 7th to 10th. I'll start 7th to 10th. Grace, I'll start with Goshen. Goshen, I definitely see being dead last. They really struggled this year. They really don't have a size to compete with anybody. So I personally think Goshen will go winless in conference play this year and finish in dead last, exactly where they were projected to be in preseason by the league and where I had them projected. 9th place, I predict I really think Mount Vernon Nazarene will finish just outside the top 8, so they'll just miss a playoff spot. Of course, the top 8 teams out of the 10 get into the league tournament. I don't see Mount Vernon Nazarene getting up to that 8 seed. They've really struggled this year in terms of scoring in conference, only averaging 52 points per game. They've also struggled with turnovers, especially against teams that outsize them. I think that continues in the second half of conference play, and I really think as we head into the new year, and I do think Mount Vernon Nazarene will finish in that number 9 spot. I predict they will finish 2-16 in league play. And then in that number 8 spot, I predict that the Bethel Lady Pilots will finish in 8th. I predict they will finish 4-14 in the conference. They are 1-3 right now. I think the only teams that they beat in conference play will be their second game against Goshen and both against Mount Vernon. At minimum, I predict Bethel will be 4-14. Maybe they get to 5-13 if they can split with Grace, but that's going to be a tall task because Grace definitely outsizes them. And then I predict Grace will finish in that number 7 spot, that they will at least be 6-12 in the conference. I really don't, maybe they get up to 7 conference wins. They're 0-4 right now, but obviously getting to 7 conference wins is going to be really, really difficult, especially because they still got to play all of the really, really good teams in the second half, and as we head into the new year, resuming conference play. So I more realistically, I think you'll see Grace either finish 5-13, maybe 6-12. But you never know. Anybody can beat anybody. The Crossroads League super competitive this year. And then I think Taylor will finish in that number 6 spot. At least that's where I have them finishing right now. Either at 10-8 or 9-9. They still have to play the best 6 teams in the conference, being Marion, St. Francis, Spring Arbor, Huntington, and Indiana Wesleyan. Of course, Taylor still has to play all those teams. They actually have to play 5 of those teams twice and then 1 more time against Indiana Wesleyan, and I think Taylor loses all of those games to those opponents, to where I think they will easily finish 9-9 at worst, maybe 10-8. All depends on how it goes. I think more realistically for Taylor, I think they sweep Huntington, and I think they lose the second game to Indiana Wesleyan because that game will be at IWU, where IWU has been dominant at home so far this year. And I think that continues against Taylor in that game coming up the end of January. And I think Huntington will finish in that number 5 spot. That's where I have them officially, to me, where I have them projected to finish. I think they'll either be 10-8 or 11-7. And this is a team, again, that is really dangerous. And they are without Kendall Yoakum and Bailey Kellum, yes. But they still have really good talent with Izzy Shepard off the bench, Addie Shank, as well as Allison Price, who's a freshman who's played very, very well. And then, of course, Annika Nelson and Liv Raby, who have just been phenomenal down low for the Wildcats, especially Nelson, that can shoot from the outside. So now, is there a chance I can see Huntington getting to the 4 seed? Yes. But I think more realistically, they finish in that number 5 spot to where they get to at least 10-8, potentially 11-7. Then in 4th place, I have Indiana Wesleyan finishing in 4th. I have them at either 11-7 or 12-6. I think more realistically 11-7. 12-6 is kind of a stretch right now, especially because this is a really, really young team. Yeah, they have a bright future with Addie Hovey as well as Ayla Krieger and Ellie Kelleher, especially if Kelleher can get a little bit better with ball handling control. I think most of all, this is a Lady Wildcat team that I really think can make a super deep run in the national tournament next year, at least to the Elite Eight round, especially with the incoming recruiting class they have in. I don't see them making a super deep run in nationals this year, being an extremely young team. And I just think that more than likely what you'll see from this Lady Wildcat team as we end the year is, I think, will we see several more wins with them as we close out this season? Yes. Do I think that they can easily get into the national tournament? Yes. However, they are going to have to win a lot more conference games in order to do that, and even to host a national tournament. I think roughly you probably want to see them finish overall probably somewhere around that 19-9, 20-10, including through the opening round of the league tournament. So now, is that definitely in reach for the Wildcats? Yes. But it's going to be a challenge because this is a super competitive conference and anybody can beat anybody. Now, I think the only two scenarios for the Wildcats to be that number 4 seed are, one, that if they lose twice to Spring Arbor and have Taylor lose twice to Huntington, and IWU themselves beat Huntington at home in the second matchup on Wednesday, February 4th. I think that's one of the scenarios for them to be that number 4 seed. I think the only other scenario is to beat Spring Arbor once, preferably at home coming up this coming Saturday, and on top of that, also have Taylor sweep Huntington, and then I will try to either beat Huntington at home Wednesday, February 4th, or beat Taylor at home Wednesday, January 28th. I think those are the only scenarios for Indiana Wesleyan to be that number 4 seed, while at the same time sweeping everybody else that they have to play, including the second game against Goshen, both games against Bethel, both games against Mount Vernon Nazarene, and both games against Grace College, respectively. And then in third place, I have Spring Arbor finishing in that number 3 spot, either 13-5 or 14-4. Again, this is a really, really good team this year. They have excellent defensive numbers, and I really think they have a chance of being that number 3 seed. And then the number 2 seed, obviously by far, St. Francis officially finishes, to me, in that number 2 spot, either 15-3 or 16-2. They are a phenomenal team this year, led by Jeremy Henney. They have a sophomore this year, Callie Gregory, who was Crossroads League Freshman Player of the Year last year, and she's having a phenomenal year. Also, junior guard Isabella Gizzi. You can't forget about Julia Mantilla or Taylor Fordyce as well, as both players are playing phenomenal from three-point range as well. So this is a really, really good Lady Cougar team out of Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I think they'll easily finish second. And then in first place, no question about it, the Marion Lady Knights finished in the number 1 spot. They win the Crossroads League regular season, and I also predict they will win the Crossroads League Tournament Championship game as well, having home court advantage throughout all 3 rounds of the league tournament, which they have never lost on their home floor in all 3 rounds of the league tournament, they have lost in the past in the league tournament at home against Indiana Wesleyan, also I believe against Taylor several years ago. But outside of that, going into the national tournament, in the opening 2 rounds, Marion has never lost at home in the opening 2 rounds of a national tournament. I think that continues this year. And this is a team that I predict, no question about it, is going to run the table in the conference, finish 18-0 for the first time under head coach Santana Anderson. And this is also a team I could really see going at least to the Final Four in the national tournament and then losing to either Dordt, Freed-Hardman, Campbellsville, or Bethel of Tennessee. I think that, and maybe even Dakota State as well. So those are the teams that I could really see Marion losing to super, super far along in the national tournament. And this is by far the best team that Marion has been this year, really for the first time since the Steve Brooks era, when they did run the table in the conference tournament, or in the regular season, being 18-0. So that's how I see everybody finishing, and I'll give my final projections on that coming up roughly around January 18th or 19th, once we get into the final 9 games of conference play, and then making my final projections there as well. Don't forget, daily game recaps are going to be coming our way more than likely next Monday, recapping all the games from this coming Saturday, and then next Thursday, January 8th, recapping all the games from Wednesday, January 7th. So again, make sure that you stay tuned for all of that. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please make sure that you do so. I really, really appreciate that, and I appreciate any feedback that you may provide me. And let's hit my goal of 500 subscribers by February 21st, 2026. So thanks so much for tuning in this video. If it was super helpful to you, please either like, comment, or subscribe. And thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you had a very blessed and Merry Christmas and have a Happy New Year, and God bless.